Week 13 of the Career Sandwich podcast. Today we're talking change.
I like it. It's very seasonal, very timely.
Yes, very seasonal indeed. Depending on what state and school district you're in, if you have kids or not, like you may be doing the back to school routine. If you're in college, you're likely starting to rev up, get ready for the fall semester or quarter, whichever it may be. For many folks, just in their professional lives too, a lot of change. Year end
Mm,
is approaching for many companies, performance reviews, thinking about where folks want to be next year. There's just a lot of change happening everywhere. And
yeah, we're
in the
living in it.
coming weeks, even the trees will probably start to change, from green
Yeah,
to the beautiful fall colors. So we thought we would lean into the theme happening all over the world around change and actually talk about that today in the podcast. So I'm really excited.
I, I love it. And not to scare you, Shelby, but I know when I went camping last weekend, leaves are changing as the
Oh
wind
yeah.
was blowing. You could see these leaves. I'm like, oh, we're here. And I just saw that I think 9 more days for the first kickoff for OSU's football for the season. So we're here. We're
Wow.
here. Yeah. So
Yeah, we are. I not to date this because I'm sure people will listen, not obviously that folks aren't going to listen today, but it's the end of August right now.
mm,
And that's pretty wild. I in my mind, once we hit September, it's usually just a mad dash to the end of the year. And we've been
yeah.
hearing that a lot from our clients too, feeling like, oh my gosh, how
Yeah.
do I, there's a bunch of stuff that's changing that I have to navigate.
Yeah.
How do I make the
Yeah.
most out of the rest of the year? All these
For
things.
sure.
So excited to dive in. And I think we've got some pretty easy bite-sized tips that folks can kind of put into practice right away. But
Love it.
we
Let's
love
jump
a
on
good,
in.
let's do it. Let's do it. We love a good alliteration, a good acronym. We love anything kind of kitschy to help really frame a topic. And so, in the spirit of both of our kids going back to school in the last few weeks, we thought we would do a little ABC of change for
Love
this
it.
week's episode. Um, First letter, of course, A in how to like really handle transitions and change well is to acknowledge it. If you
Mm,
Google the science of change, you will be bombarded with information about how the essential first step of navigating change, big or small, is to simply acknowledge that it is happening.
Yep.
To bury our head in the sand or pretend like it's not happening, tune out change is doing a massive disservice of ourselves and does not set us up for
Mhm,
success. And so
mhm,
paying attention to all the degrees of change that are happening around you is critical.
100%.
And I think, you and I have had a lot of conversations around this. And one thing that I really notice, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this, is so many people don't fully see and appreciate how much change they experience day in and day out.
Mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah.
I look at
Yeah.
the last couple of years, like it's wild the amount of change that the world has gone through. And
Mhm, mhm,
obviously, there's big, huge changes dealing with COVID. A lot of
mhm,
these companies are doing return to work stuff. These are big, heavy changes that are very easy to spot, point to, and say, whoa, that's a change from 6 months ago or a year ago. But
mhm.
there's also just change that we experience and live through each and every day that often
Yeah.
doesn't get enough credit. So, this idea
Yeah.
of acknowledging all of the change that someone goes
Yeah.
through, I think is a really important first step.
Yeah. No, I mean, I do think it's because, we typically think of change as a big thing,
Mm.
but there's like the smallest aspects of change, that, I'm just thinking of like a good example, a classic example of, I guess, is like when you're raising a child, right? You're like, they seem to be ready before you are, because like they're changing, you haven't quite caught up to it, but like they're growing and they're moving so quick. But it feels like every 4 months, it's like a new chapter because it's like it's change. It's around us every day. It's inevitable. Like every aspect of our life will be going through change. Like it's just that's the pretty much the only constant, right? That we
Mhm.
can count on. And it doesn't look the same for everybody, and it definitely doesn't come in one size. So,
Yeah, yeah. A really simple framework that I like to use to help people see all of the change that they're experiencing is just four simple points. Big change, small change, obvious change, and not obvious change. And if
mhm,
someone puts those four things on a piece of paper and starts to actually think through, okay, what's a really big change I've gone through? Or what's a really
mhm,
obvious change
mhm.
I've gone through? And the best one is usually what's a not obvious change that I've gone through. When
Yeah,
people
yeah,
take the time to sit in that, they start to really realize how interconnected all of the changes in their
I would
life
agree.
really is. Uh,
Mhm.
and I think it's something that we have to really be mindful of as people
Mhm.
are navigating their
Yeah,
lives day in and day out.
yeah. And I don't think I think it's never easy to go through a change or to recognize like this is happening. Um, but I think that, acknowledgement, paying attention to the details of that change, I think it is critical, right? Because it never is going to get easier, but depending on what that change is. But as we'll talk here in a little bit, there's things you can do to minimize that effect on all the things around you, right? Like depending on how things are connected and stuff. So
Mhm,
sitting in it, even though it may hurt, you know, is important.
mhm, mhm.
Or, and maybe even the most positive changes can have that sense of like, oh no, what's this going to mean? I'm thinking if I took a promotion, right, that's a transition or a change that generally feels good, right? Like, yeah, like I'm moving this direction, but like it can oftentimes come with other, lingering effects, right? Like maybe not enough time at home, or there's a lot of shifts in routine when that happens. There's a little bit more stress potentially. There may be, you know, I didn't quite think I didn't know if it was going to be for me, and it turns out that it is. And, I want more of that, or vice versa. So even the most positive things can still have some negative symptoms to kind of think
Yeah.
about.
And vice versa, right? Like really
Mhm.
like tough change can have positive downstream
Yep.
symptoms, like
Yep.
and I think that's the real takeaway when we say pay attention and acknowledge
Hmm.
all of the change is that look at the ripple effects of every change that you're making. The example you just shared of someone gets a promotion, yeah, positive change might be their paycheck increases. Potentially downstream negative could be they don't have as much time with colleagues that they,
Yep.
also call friends, or
Yep.
for example, like more stress or less time with the family. You know, you have to look at any change, positive or negative, and to your point, figure out, okay, how do I make the most of that and
Hmm. Hmm.
all the downstream impacts
Yep.
of that
Yep.
change? It's
Yep.
that intentionality, that awareness, that
Hmm.
seeing the thing and naming it and calling it real, and not just like blindly going through it and saying, oh,
Oh
it'll sort
yeah,
itself out.
yeah, that's the worst you can do. That's like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I love it. I love acknowledging it. Like you said, it is start of the classic, change management methodology, and I love
The
it. And
foundation.
it's yeah. And yeah, it's often the one that the looking around part is often where people, even if you're setting a team up for change, you often unfortunately ignore, right? Like, does everybody know that this is going to happen?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's probably a whole nother episode,
Mhm. Mhm.
but cool. What's B? What's B?
Well, so, okay, let's imagine a world where someone has done the work, they've sat down and said, okay, I'm gonna map out all the changes, big, small, obvious, not obvious,
Yep.
that are in front of me in the next few weeks or months. What do they need to do to like really start to get through those changes as productively and healthy as possible? I think they need to build plans.
Hmm. I
You
agree.
know, there's there's really no world where coming up with a plan on the fly in moments of high stress is a good strategy, right? I think we've said this in like 8 podcasts now, but the go-to phrase, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail,
Hmm.
is so, so, so true with all degrees of change in our
Yeah.
lives, both personally and professionally. And it's just easier to anticipate and build plans when you're not in that fight or flight mode.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
I
know?
100% agree. I mean, I think, good or bad, right? That change is going to require some sort of plan of execution to get through it, right? So I think about just getting laid off from a job, maybe you get severance, you get some of these resources, like, hopefully you've done the work to kind of sort of figure out what you're going to need to go through this transition into whatever's going to come next. And what does that look like if it's a month from now, 2 months from now, 6 months from now?
Mhm.
Running those scenarios, what it does is help a little bit with the anxiety and the unknown aspect of, and which is what can really scare people in transition, is like, what's the unknowns, and like, what if it doesn't work, what if I don't get this in time? It's like you can always go back to the plan, right? And adjust that as needed. But I think the plans are at least for me, I've found those to be the helpful aspects of everything I've gone through and changed so far in my life.
Yeah.
Even, I mean, getting a raise, the flip side of it, if you're going to get a promotion, what are you going to do with that extra potential income, rather than just let it float out there, or give it to Amazon or whatever for more trinkets in your life. Like, what is the plan? Like, how do you put that to use to benefit you long term, short term, or whatever it may be? I think that planning is very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we say the word plan, I think there's a lot of quick connotations that people have to the word plan. And
Mhm.
I want to kind of dispel where
Yeah.
some of the listeners' minds might be going right now. Is like, oh, like this needs to be some really verbose, step
Yeah.
by step exact thing that's like, this is exactly what I'm going to do if exactly this thing happens to me. And that's
Hmm.
not at all
Yep.
what we mean by plan.
Yep.
We really only feel like the goal of a plan is to anticipate what you will feel in that moment.
Hmm.
The greatest source of anxiety for people is the fear of a future potential feeling. Oh, I want to feel
Yep.
different than I currently feel, or the fear of, oh, I might feel that and I don't want to feel that, so I'm going to avoid that. That's what
Hmm.
prevents so
Hmm.
many people from doing this planning because they don't want
Yep.
to. I don't want to think about what it might feel like
Yeah.
to get laid off. I
Yeah.
don't want to
Yeah.
think about what it might feel like to lose a loved one. I don't want to think
Yeah.
about these things. So
Yeah.
avoidance is a built-in strategy. And if anybody listening thinks that they're immune to that, they're lying.
Yeah. Yep.
It's
Yep.
in our bones.
Yep.
But naming that and actually working through that is the one of the most effective ways to diffuse that anxiety, because
Hmm.
you're training your nervous system to actually tolerate those feelings of discomfort in a
Yep.
positive way.
Yep.
So it's less about a plan like step
On
one,
this
step two, step
day.
three,
Yep.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
rigidity of it, and it's more
Yep.
like I have planned to move through this experience. Like I can experience this. I can feel this thing, and I am confident that
Mhm.
I get through it because I've
Yep.
practiced.
Yep.
And then two, like directional planning,
Yep.
right? Like, hey, here are the things that are most important to me.
Mhm.
I've decided that I'm going to move in that direction when a
Yep.
change happens. So I think
Yeah.
that's an important thing to kind of dispel.
And I think it's the anything in a kind of a freedom in a frame is the best way to think about most. I mean, that's why I like them as like frameworks and stuff, because you have to you have to leave room for the change that's going to come in after that, right? Like it's not like you got one change at a time that you have to deal with, right? It's like, I just lost, let's say I just lost my job, just laid off. Oh gosh, now all of a sudden the kiddo gets sick and there's another disruption into the thing. And like, it's like that's the change is the only thing that we can really count on. And like to build that frame, or like
Mhm.
you said, the confidence that I can get through this, but leaving room to adjust and tweak is what is the most valuable thing you can do for yourself. Because again, it keeps all that stress at bay. Like, okay, all right, yeah, this just happened. It sucks in the moment, but here's, you know, initiate plan on top of the other plan.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, I love it.
And I mean, I think look, like I will be the first to admit that it is way easier to talk about this stuff than it is to do this stuff,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like it is hard to, like I was just saying, think about, oh, what happens? What would I do if I got fired tomorrow unexpectedly?
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
what's
Yeah.
my strategy in that moment? It's
Hmm.
uncomfortable. It's hard to think
Hmm.
about. You're probably
Hmm.
busy. Why on earth would I
Yeah.
about something like that if I feel like I'm doing well at work or, all those
Hmm.
things? But, when we look to the people who I would call experts in emergency management or experts in navigating change,
Mm.
the first responders of the
I
world,
was just thinking that. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the doctors, the surgeon, the
Hmm.
people who there's so much on the line when they're in moments of crazy, fast, rapid change.
Yeah.
Like there's
Yeah.
literally lives on the line at times.
Yeah.
And so, like, what strategies do they deploy?
Hmm.
Every time it's prep and practice, it's
Yeah.
having plans. If this happens, we will respond this way. If
Hmm.
that happens, we will respond that way.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yeah.
like, we would be foolish to
Yeah.
ignore those best practices
Yeah.
because they're tried and true and they work.
Yeah. Absolutely. And they're practicing those things on a regular basis. Yeah.
100%.
They're
Yeah.
not just putting the plan in. They're like, let's make sure it executes as intended,
Yep.
So no, I love it.
Yeah.
So let's say you acknowledged it. So you did A,
Yep.
you kind of initiated the plan, kind of set it in motion, sat with that. You did the first 48 that we kind of talked about a few weeks back, right? Now what? Like now what do I do? I'm in this midst of change. Where do I go from here?
I think like the C of the ABCs of navigating transitions and navigating change is really getting out of the mindset of these are moments in time to change is we need like a continuum mindset. Uh,
Hmm.
the reason I say that is I talk to a lot of people who,
Hmm.
when they are looking for work or if they're, trying to land some new gig or whatever it may be, they've got something that they're trying to accomplish in the short term. Once they reach that milestone, they 90% of the time
Hmm.
will say something to the effect of like, okay, like I
Yeah.
did it. I got to where I did the thing. I landed the job, I got the new title,
Yep.
whatever.
Yep.
Now, yes, do you want to acknowledge milestones along your journey? Absolutely. If you
Hmm.
landed a new
Hmm.
gig, got a promotion, whatever it may be, like kudos, amazing, celebrate in that moment. But it is a total misstep to think that you are suddenly or in some way like done with
Yeah.
that, like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, now I'm good.
Yeah.
And so many people do that, right? Like resumes are
Hmm.
the most obvious example I can think of. For some reason,
Oh
people
yeah.
think that they're only supposed to maintain them or do them or work on
Yeah.
them while they're actively looking for a job. And then the second they land
Hmm.
that job, it's like literally like a cliff. Day one, they've lost their resume, they don't keep it updated, they have no idea where it is, or,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
and it's that moment in time mindset where like people just look to milestones and they go through this really like complicated, hard exercise trying to accomplish whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. And then they like fall off the cliff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they like don't do anything to
Yeah.
navigate the change that's ongoing around them. Like
Mhm.
that's the big C, is like continuously check in on
Yeah.
the changes that are happening around you all the time. It's constant.
Yeah. I love this because it's so much easier to um be able to navigate through this like change if you're always in a the amount of rev up that it could
Oh
take,
my
right?
goodness.
Each time that you go through a change, like I'm thinking of like what the example you said about laying off, getting laid off, or even if you want to proactively switch jobs, like everyone says, "Oh, the dread of getting myself ready to do this." That's like in some cases the biggest barrier for people to going out and finding something better for themselves is the work to be ready to go do the thing,
Mhm.
and it's if you're constantly working on this stuff, checking in, it's little tweaks is all you have to do versus complete overhauls. And I think there's a lot of other, that's just one example, right? You tweaking your resume as you learn new skills, do whatever, or collecting, we talk about collecting your artifacts, your brag walls, all these things, building that stuff in the flow is a lot easier than like, oh gosh, now I got to go find it all.
Mhm.
Um, it's just naturally going to lead to a state of constantly being able to, I don't want to say absorb change, but be able to kind of like
Mhm.
move through it a little bit easier,
Yeah.
because you're not sitting back on, and like we talk about it all the time, like part of our missions and goal here is to help people never to get caught off guard. Like this is the work, whether it's in your career and life are blended, you should obviously be constantly checking in and be ready for
Mhm.
whatever's going to come next. Could be a positive thing, could be a negative thing, but you want to be able to seize the moment if it's an opportunity that's like, hey, classic example, hey, I'd love to chat with you over some coffee sometime.
Mhm.
Be ready to know like that's probably not just a let's get some coffee. It's probably there could be the opportunity to that they want to talk to you about a new gig or something else. Or so being ready in this flow, I think is, and I just can't stress it enough. It's checking in, being just it's it has to be a part of everybody's hygiene, you
Yeah.
know?
And not to get like, too meta about it, but I mean, that's why we started Career Sandwich, right?
Yeah,
We
100%.
are everything that we're building in the platform right now is in that same spirit of I love the word hygiene. I think that's totally the
Hmm.
right word.
Hmm.
We have hygiene in so many other facets of our life. We brush our teeth every
Yeah.
day. We, bathe. We
Yeah.
do all these things to like keep ourselves happy and healthy and, feel good. And yet we don't take that same
Yeah.
philosophy with our career, right? And
No.
we're
No.
trying to be the place where you can actually develop those routines, and
Yep.
the easiest place we think to start is by riding the wave of change, right? Giving people
Hmm.
tools and resources, scripts, all
Yep.
sorts of activities, exercises, videos, all sorts of things to help arm them and say, okay, here's how you can navigate these changes, big, small, obvious, and not
Yep.
obvious,
Yep.
uh,
Yeah.
and come out the other side like always a step further, a step
Yeah.
higher than you were before, without it
Yep.
feeling like a Herculean effort. So
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, I think that's the big one for C,
Yeah.
is these are changes are constant, and
Hmm.
bringing that mind space to
Hmm.
how you navigate your life
Yeah.
is, and your professional and personal life
Yeah.
is one of the best ways you can invest in yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to reiterate, when I think of like help making it easier to navigate through change, it doesn't we still don't, or we don't mean to just blow by it, not care about. Like we still have to acknowledge it, like step one, right? But what it does allow you to do, I think, is get through that stage just a little bit easier, right? Because you're not weighted down, right? You're not, you acknowledge it, action, go, right? And then put it all into play. I mean, I transitions are scary, hard, no matter how many times you go through. Like nothing is like I don't think every change is going to be the same, right? Like if you got laid off at A in the at company A and then company B, they're not going to lay you off the same. Your life is going to be different at the time. Like, so you can't just assume it's the same as always. So that's what I love about this episode is it's really starts with that acknowledgement, you know, in those cases, what's different this time versus next time or from last time.
Yeah,
So
and all in the spirit of how do
get
you
through it
make the
and
most out of change,
mm-hmm,
no
mm-hmm,
matter what variety of change or
yeah.
how you feel about it straight out the gate. There's always an opportunity to be had, and
Mm-hmm. Yep.
folks find and spot those more quickly.
Yep. I agree.
Awesome.
Awesome. Cool.
Well, I think we can probably wrap that one up.
Awesome.
It was great chatting as always.
It is.
And for
Yes.
everyone listening, thanks so much for joining us. We
Great.
love doing these. If there's anything in specific that would be helpful for us to cover in future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, happy transitions no matter what you're going through.
That's all right.
We're all going through
I love
something.
it.
Rooting for everybody
We
along
are
the way.
that's the slogan. We're all going through something.
Yeah,
So
awesome.
awesome. Cool. Thanks, Shelby.
Thank you.